can recall, and I think it was 82 and 84, the massive arguments that Labor had about exporting uranium. I mean, no one had the courage to even suggest there should be nuclear power in Australia at that time. It was bad enough to think that we would dare export uranium to places that would use nuclear power, like Japan, where it keeps the lights on and keeps the heater on in the winter. That apparently that was a terrible thing for us to do, according to some. And I remember, well, we only won those debates by 1 or 2 votes. I remember I had to drink a bottle of cognac with one bloke to get him the last vote, get us over the line. They were the days. But, of course, times change. And one wonders what the attitude of Australians today would be, given that now I don't think there's much of an issue around the world. There's plenty of nuclear power plants. It's not as if that would come as a big shock. Well, I'm fortunate to be joined not in this studio, but by James McGrath, a Queensland Senator, who's an old mate of mine. G'day, James. How are you?
Richard, I'm brilliant, and you're good too, I hope.
Mate, I'm dangerous. Don't worry about me. I'm in the best of shape. Now, nuclear power, is it feasible in Australia? I mean, do we need it? We've got 400 years' worth of coal, and everyone now tells me that's a terrible thing. What are we going to do?
Well, what Keith Peters, the member for Hinkler, and I have suggested is we should have an inquiry into nuclear power. Let's have a conversation about it. Everybody's getting hot and bothered about coal, which I don't understand why, because coal provides a lot of jobs here in my home state in Queensland. But as part of our energy mix, why don't we have a look at nuclear power? Nuclear power doesn't emit greenhouse gases. We've got a third of the world's uranium here in Australia. Our country is geographically stable. Why doesn't the Senate have an inquiry into nuclear power? And that's all that we've suggested. Keith and I are working on some draft terms of reference at the moment. But what's disappointing is that so many people, especially those ferals and the Greenies, are jumping up and down and saying, oh, no, we can't do this. Well, we just want to have a conversation. We want to have a chat about it. We want to have an adult conversation. Too often in politics in Australia, when it comes to issues of public policy, it's often who can scream the loudest. And we just want to have a considered, factual-based conversation about can nuclear power be part of the energy mix for Australia?
Yeah, I think maybe it's possible now, when it wasn't possible 30-something years ago, because, I never forget the extraordinary debates that we went through in those days. And there was a group called People for Nuclear Disarmament, which doesn't exist anymore, that were big at the time. And there's been massive changes in our society since then. But of course, it was always the case that the women of the world get very worried about nuclear power. Every time I looked at a poll in the old days about it, blokes would support it, but women wouldn't have a bar of it.
Yeah, well, I haven't seen polls in relation to support in Australia. But what I know is that, for example, France has 75% of its power comes from nuclear energy. And I just think, well, why can't Australia, with a third of the world's uranium, we've got the stuff here in our backyard, why can't we have a conversation about whether we can dig it up and turn it into energy? And let's have a conversation about the economics of it, the environment side of it, and in terms of the safety record, rather than people like the old, whatever you call it, C&D and all those old groups sort of dusting off their placards from the 1970s and 80s and screaming at us. Let's have a factual-based conversation here. And that's why I can't understand why people are opposed to that. It is a viable form of energy, and let's see if it can be something that works here in Australia, or should we continue to rely on coal and other forms of energy? And I'm happy for us to rely on coal because we...
Now, just interrupt and say, look, I just want to run this grab of Angus Taylor, the Minister, and see what he says about it.
The Prime Minister's made many comments on this in the lead-up to the election. Right now, it is illegal to build a nuclear power station. And as he's said, when there's a very clear business case that shows the economics of this can work, we're more than willing to consider it.
Well, I suppose that's the big question. Is there a business case for this? I mean, around the world, we're not seeing them being built, are we?
No, we're not seeing too many being built. But this is why I think here in Australia, when we've got a third of the world's uranium, let's have a discussion. And if the economics don't stack up, well, then, yeah, it probably won't be built. But let's have that conversation first, and let's have a look, and let it be guided by the facts. Because I can't get anyone to tell me reliably how much it's going to cost to build a nuclear power station. People bandy around all these crazy figures. Well, as a senator, I'd like to have an inquiry, and I'd like to participate in that inquiry and ask experts in terms of, is it economical to build nuclear reactors in Australia? Is it economical for them to supply power to Australian households and businesses? And from an environmental perspective, they don't emit greenhouse gases, but are there other concerns that we should be worried about? And what is interesting, I think, is from what I'm hearing between the lines from Angus Taylor is that we need some more information here. And that's why what Keith Pitt and I are proposing is the vehicle in which to have a serious, sustained inquiry into nuclear power.
Yeah, the thing is, I'd love to have an inquiry into whether or not it'll be accepted or not. But the only way you can do that is have a vote in the end, I suppose. But one thing's for sure, it's one of those sort of red-hot issues. No matter, whenever it gets raised, it raises passions instantly. And I doubt if that's changed all that much. I still think there'll be a enormous opposition because, the Greens will go troppo at the drop of a hat. And as soon as you mention this, you can just imagine the speeches you get from Hanson Young and the others. I mean, I don't want to imagine them, but I can.
I agree with you about the Greens. I think the Greens don't need a hat to be dropped to go troppo. They're in that permanent state already. And they're part of the problem that we're facing in dealing with the energy situation here in Australia, that they've become completely blindsided by this cult of renewable energy. And that sounds great and brilliant, but there is a huge cost to that also that is borne by the taxpayers. What's going to happen when on cloudy days and the wind stops blowing? We can't use coal because Di Natale wants to ban it. So where is the energy going to come from to power the households and businesses and to power Australia? And this is the Greens are taking an hysterical approach to how we deal with energy. And what we want to do is have a serious approach. What was interesting, I'm back in Brisbane now, but I've been bouncing around the state as a senator and everywhere between Blackall and Roma and Charters Towers and Longreach and up to Innisfail and Ingham and back down again. And what people said to me is, yeah, let's have the conversation. Let's talk about nuclear power. Good on you for raising it as an issue. And if the facts don't add up at the end of the inquiry, then we'll make that decision and there will be a vote. And I'm pretty sure that Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg are not going to do anything silly in relation to the economics of nuclear power or the environment as such.
Has the Prime Minister expressed a view on it to you?
Not to me. He certainly expressed public views, but as a happy backbencher, along with Keith Pitt, we're allowed to express our views, and that's what we're doing. And I will be moving a motion in the Senate on the first Wednesday that we come back. I think it's the 4th of July, in relation to setting up an inquiry into nuclear power. And I would hope that the Labor Party and the Greens and the Liberal National Parties and the other crossbenchers all support it, so we can have a serious conversation about it rather than just people shrieking at each other from different phone boxes around the country.
Well, I wish you well, but I have a feeling the shrieking will continue. It's just very hard to stop the shriekers in this country. Thanks very much for your time, mate. I appreciate it very much.
Anytime, Richo. Good on you.
Okay, and I must say, well, I should have asked you where do you rate this whole Clive Palmer spending thing on? I can't, like 30 to 50 million. Is there anything we can do about that?
Look, if I had $50 million to spend, I'd be buying a chateau in France or a castle in Ireland. I wouldn't be spending on an election in Australia. But look, if he wants to spend the money, well, I'm one of these people, well, let him spend it. And I think what the election showed is that Australians can't be necessarily swayed that much when people want to spend a huge amount of money. And look, you know, the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters, I expect will probably definitely will look into the 2019 election and how different people spent money, whether it was Clive Palmer or GetUp. I'm sure will issues that will come forth. But living in a democracy, you've got to take the good with the bad. And if someone wants to spend $50 million promoting himself, well, I'd buy a castle rather than what he's done. But, you know, that's up to Clive.
It's enough to make you move. I can't. I just can't. I can't handle him at all, I've got to say. Now, last question. There has been criticism of the 3-week period for pre-polling because, you know, there's, you know, half the people have voted by the time you get to election day. What do you reckon? Do you keep it at 3 weeks or do you reduce it?
I'd like to see it reduced. The Electoral Matters Committee in the last Parliament, when I was chairing it, we recommended it get reduced to 2 weeks. We'll obviously look at it again. Personally, I think it should be a week, but I think it certainly should be reduced down to 2 weeks as a compromise. You know, it puts a lot of pressure on political parties in terms of the volunteers who are out there. There's cost for the Australian Electoral Commission, and also you want voters to make informed decisions. And if people are starting to vote 3 weeks before polling day, you know, a mere 2 weeks after the election's been called, a lot of parties don't have their full policies out there. And what's happening is people are using pre-poll as a convenience factor. You know, I'll just tick it off. You know, it's something I can do between, you know, picking up my lotto and dropping the kids off at footy or whatever it is. Voting's pretty important. I want voters to make a decision as informed as possible on as many facts that are available to them. And pre-poll stretches that argument, sadly. So, yeah, I'd like us to look into certainly reducing it down to 2 weeks.
OK, James, thank you very much for your time. It's always a pleasure. We'll talk to you again soon.